Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. I thought for fun I'd talk a little bit about an oldie but a goodie this month. You remember all the people who like to tout the idea that little girls who are bossy should instead be told they have leadership potential?
Bossy.
Bossy.
Bossy. Bossy.
When I was growing up, I was called bossy.
Well, I feel like these women have painfully rose-colored glasses when reflecting on their own experiences as children, or at minimum, I have to wonder how many of them have actually seen what bossy little girls are like. Because let me tell you, as someone who now has very direct experience in that realm, I can safely say that anyone who would call this leadership material doesn't know the first thing about being a good leader. I know I've talked briefly about this subject before, but I've never really given it a full response. I feel like now I have some good material to really challenge it. Now, what does it look like to see a child who is being bossy in action? It's not this romantic notion of someone taking charge and acting in some noble way to stand up for what they believe in. It looks like someone domineering over others, barking orders, and wanting to control every aspect of play, and pitching a fit when things don't go the way they want. First and foremost, this is just an unpleasant kind of attitude to be around. It's not charming or cute. It's frustrating and annoying. It's often rude and petulant. So before we even get too deep into the discussion, acting like this is anything that should be encouraged in children is already a recipe for creating terrible people that no one wants to be around. Next, allowing children to freely boss people around without any kind of correction leads them to become self-centered and selfish. Think about the nature of bossing other people around. Usually, someone tends towards these kinds of behaviors for a few possible reasons. One is that they can't stand the idea of things not going the way they want. They may have this false sense that they know how best to do things, or they may simply not want to entertain doing things in another way. Another reason is because they are unable to take the perspectives of others. This is a common problem in children because, before a certain age, they literally lack the ability to properly empathize and to truly understand things from another person's perspective. However, I would argue that the last thing you want to do in response to this is to simply let them go on demanding that everything goes their way just because they want it to be so, and under no circumstances would you want to encourage it. Children learn from those around them, and so it is vital to teach them the importance of learning to understand that others have needs and wants of their own, and that these deserve at least some consideration when deciding how to act. Learning to take the perspectives of others is an integral part of developing empathy, the ability to debate and reason through problems, the ability to develop appropriate and satisfying two-way relationships, and the ability to effectively function with others in society. I'm sure you can think of at least a few people who somehow went through life never learning this lesson, and the result usually isn't someone that people want to be around. Another side of this to consider is that failing to correct bossiness in children does not allow them the critical experience of failing to have their wants and desires met and the resulting emotional turmoil that follows this experience. Believe it or not, people just can't get what they want all the time in life, and the sooner they learn this fact, the sooner they can develop appropriate ways to respond to this disappointment. This is parenting 101 in dealing with tantrums. When a child demands that they get something, or that something go exactly the way they want it to go, and they don't get what they want and start throwing a hissy fit, the correct response is not to immediately bend to their whim and give in to their demands. It's instead critical to teach children that they are able to manage their frustrations in healthy ways, and certainly without taking out those frustrations on others. There are a few other negative behavior patterns that can develop out of unchecked bossiness as well. It both displays and tends to further result in a lack of flexibility and adaptiveness, because rather than being able to comfortably roll with a situation and the unpredictable nature of others, people who are bossy are usually swept up in trying to control things and making sure that things go just so. This means that when things don't go exactly the way they want, they may be more prone to anxiety or anger and may just generally be less able to deal with things. Furthermore, in my experience seeing bossiness in children, they usually seem to have a persistent inability to accept fault or display any kind of humility. That is, when things don't go the way they want, often their first response is to try to lay blame on others. I would argue that this actually displays a lack of leadership qualities, if anything. After all, an effective leader is usually one who is able to learn and bounce back from mistakes or from things going wrong, especially if the problem was something that was within their control or was even their fault. People who are eager to blame others for their own mistakes lack the ability to self-reflect and to make positive changes, and are usually insufferable to be around, and certainly to work for. Now, I've been focused primarily on the behavior of the bossy child in specific, but there's another layer to this. The women who proudly wave the banner of little girls being bossy often seem to forget that being bossy generally requires someone to be bossy too. What are the available options in this case? Either they're being bossy and controlling towards authority figures, which, as a parent who is trying to look out for the well-being of my children, I can tell you is frustrating as all get out. This is exactly where the power struggles of, but I don't want to eat healthy food, or I don't want to take my medicine, or other similar things come in. It's bad enough to be bossy in play scenarios, but trying to be bossy in terms of your own body when you know absolutely nothing about how to properly maintain it is just how you wind up becoming unhealthy and malnourished. Furthermore, if bossiness and disrespect for authority figures continues into adulthood, it doesn't always result in particularly good outcomes in work and society at large. Alternatively, they're bossy toward peers or younger siblings, which comes with its own problems. It often tends to go one of two ways. Either the two children begin to butt heads because the one being bossed around doesn't particularly like being treated that way, leading to conflicts and arguments, or the quieter child bends to the whims of the bossy child, maybe out of a desire to keep the peace, maybe out of a lack of knowing any better, whatever. Either way, if a parent or other authority figure didn't step in at this stage, the child being bossed around may never feel like they are able to step into a leadership role themselves. After all, a person being bossy isn't typically one to let others have their time in the spotlight. They're too self-centered. So why is it that children who are being bossy should be given free rein to lord over others, when this may prevent other children from feeling like they also have a legitimate right to try to stand up for themselves and take charge? Is it really a sterling example of girl power when a bossy little girl domineers over her little sister to the point that the younger child feels uncomfortable standing up for herself and instead simply goes along with whatever the other says? There is a reason that I don't let bossy behavior go unchallenged in my own daughters. I have seen firsthand what it looks like when someone is bossing someone else around, and it doesn't look like someone trying to effectively stand up and lead. Being an effective leader is complicated and requires a number of important qualities. I believe it is born out of a wish to influence others and work towards a common goal. In many ways, it requires self-sacrifice and compromise and a positive disposition in order to effectively rally people to your cause. It requires the ability to adapt and bounce back when things don't go according to plan. In contrast, being bossy is not so high-minded. It is born out of a selfish desire to control what everyone else is doing. It is demanding that you get what you want without consideration for or even at the expense of others. It is being rigid and inflexible and often responding to failure with intolerance and intimidation. This is bad enough when it happens in a petty living room squabble over who gets to play with which colored set of Mega Blocks, but it's worse when these behaviors go unchecked and start to make it out into the real world when people like this actually try to run companies and hold any legitimate power over others. These are the kinds of leaders that result in people feeling overworked, that result in situations where people's boundaries are pushed because the boss wants them to be available at all hours of the day, that result in situations where people feel unable to express even constructive improvements to the company, let alone frustrations, because the boss is too arrogant to even consider that there might be a better way of doing things. These are the kind of leaders that quash worker morale and tell people that they can easily be replaced if they don't do what they're told. These are often the kinds of leaders that are willing to exploit and underpay their workers because rather than truly desiring to lead, they're really just looking out for number one and seeking ways to get ahead at any cost. It's funny that the folks who seem to have this rosy outlook on little girls being bossy all seem to be feminist women. A common viewpoint from many of these folks is that any kind of self-restraint or reservation is in some way making yourself small and reducing your power. Which is the ultimate goal, of course. Forget all that stuff about trying to be kind or generous or helpful. On the other hand, I happen to think that if you need to be brash and obnoxious and demanding to show your power, you're not really being very effective. As much as being loud and supposedly proud doesn't necessarily equate to strength, being gentle, subtle, or collaborative doesn't necessarily equate to weakness. I have many times on this channel criticized the often dogmatic and inflexible approach of feminist ideology, especially with regards to men's issues, but you can see a lot of similarities to the problems with bossiness I've been talking about in this video to feminist approaches to certain things in society, demanding adherence to feminist messaging in many university programs, refusing to update domestic violence protocols to better reflect the actual landscape of domestic violence victims, holding to certain statistics like the wage gap or the 1 in 4 sexual abuse numbers, even in the face of conflicting evidence because of a refusal to accept another narrative, reacting with absolute embarrassing tantrums when people have the audacity to so much as discuss topics they find objectionable.
Stop it!
Oh, no. Oh, we should film it.
I guess maybe we shouldn't be too surprised that the people who show this kind of attitude as adults would act like bossiness is a positive trait to cultivate in children, especially little girls. However, I think that the rest of us can pretty plainly see that effective leadership is not in someone who raises their voice the highest, who makes the most and greatest demands, and who refuses to bend regardless of circumstance. I prefer to hold my own children to a higher standard than that, and I would hope the rest of you would want the same for yours. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.